Welcome, viewers. You're back with Bring the Fact, the channel that uncovers the truth behind global headlines. This time, we'll reveal the hidden side of an event that continues to divide the world, the recognition of Palestine's independence. Why do some nations stand firmly in support while others remain silent? What lies behind these political decisions? Morality, alliances, or strategic interest? We'll explore which countries have officially recognized Palestine, which have not, and the real reasons driving those choices. The answers may surprise you and could change how you see international diplomacy forever. But before we dive in, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons. That way you won't miss any hidden facts that we'll reveal next. In November 1988, in the city of Algiers, the Palestine Liberation Organization declared the independence of the State of Palestine. It was a moment that echoed across the Arab world, a cry of sovereignty born from decades of displacement and struggle. But the declaration alone did not guarantee a seat among nations. Recognition, in the language of diplomacy, depends not on emotion, but on calculation, alliances, and timing. As the news spread, governments around the world faced a question that would test their political courage. Would they recognize Palestine as a state, or continue to wait for peace that never seemed to come? Through the years that followed, Palestine sought legitimacy on the world stage. In 2012, the United Nations General Assembly granted it the status of a non-member observer state. It was a symbolic yet powerful step. It meant the world acknowledged Palestine as an entity, a people, and a government, but not yet a full member of the United Nations. The shadow of veto power from the United States and the Security Council ensured that the door to full membership remained half open. Yet for millions of Palestinians, the recognition at least gave their cause a name that could no longer be erased from international forums. Today, the numbers speak for themselves. Out of 193 member states of the United Nations, about 157 have officially recognized Palestine as an independent state. Some sources record a slightly different figure, 146, 150, or even 156, but they all point to one conclusion. The majority of the world accepts the existence of Palestine as a sovereign nation. In Africa, Asia, and Latin America, the recognition came early, often tied to anti-colonial solidarity and shared memories of foreign domination. In those regions, Palestine's struggle mirrored their own. But the momentum did not stop in the global south. In recent years, the wave of recognition began to reach Europe. Countries once cautious or silent now began to speak. In 2024, Ireland, Norway, and Spain jointly recognized the State of Palestine. It was a bold act, one that reignited debate across European capitals. Soon after, Slovenia and Armenia followed. By 2025, the movement had turned into something larger, a diplomatic shift. The United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, Portugal, France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and even the tiny Principality of Andorra publicly announced their recognition. It was no longer just about borders, it was about conscience. France, long seen as cautious in Middle East diplomacy, made its announcement during the United Nations General Assembly in September 2025. Cameras captured the moment as the French representative declared that Paris now officially recognized the Palestinian state, urging others to follow. It was not merely an act of politics, but of symbolism. A European power acknowledging that peace could no longer be built on silence. In the same month, the United Kingdom, after decades of hesitation, joined the list, signaling that the post-war balance of loyalties was slowly being rewritten. Meanwhile, from Latin America to Africa, the pattern had been set long ago. Cuba, Brazil, South Africa, and most of the continent had recognized Palestine since the late 1980s. Their reasoning was both moral and historical. They saw themselves in the Palestinian story. nations once under foreign control, now demanding dignity. Across Asia, Indonesia, Malaysia, and India have long stood firm in their recognition, with Indonesia even refusing any diplomatic ties with Israel as long as Palestine remained under occupation. But recognition is not only about formal signatures or declarations. It carries the weight of diplomatic consequences. Every country that recognizes Palestine knows it might strain relations with Israel or the United States. Yet the growing list of supporters reflects a gradual shift from silence to solidarity. For the Palestinian people, each new recognition feels like a light switched on in a world that too often looked away. Still, the road toward full statehood remains uncertain, and the struggle for legitimacy continues in the halls of international politics. And as this global map of recognition expands, the lines of power and principle begin to blur. The story of Palestine's recognition is no longer just about territory. It is about how nations define justice, sovereignty, and the right to exist, not in theory, but in action. While much of the world has formally recognized the State of Palestine, a powerful minority continues to withhold recognition. Among them stand nations whose political influence shapes the balance of global diplomacy: the United States, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and a few others across Europe and the Pacific. Their reasons are not uniform. Some argue legality, others timing, and some are bound by long-standing alliances. Yet behind every refusal lies a web of political calculations deeper than what appears on the surface. The United States remains the most prominent opponent of Palestine's recognition. For decades, Washington has maintained that formal statehood must emerge through negotiations with Israel, not unilateral declarations. It continues to use its veto power at the United Nations Security Council, blocking any attempt to grant Palestine full UN membership. American officials often frame this as a defense of the peace process, yet many analysts describe it as a shield for Israel's diplomatic position. The United States provides billions of dollars in military and economic assistance to Israel each year, a bond that few administrations, regardless of party, have been willing to question. In Europe, the story is more complicated. Germany, despite expressing deep sympathy for Palestinian civilians, has repeatedly stated that the time is not right for full recognition. Berlin's foreign policy remains tied to its post-war commitment to Israel's security, a historical responsibility that continues to influence every diplomatic move. In 2025, Germany voted in favor of a UN resolution supporting the two-state solution, but stopped short of official recognition, arguing that it must follow meaningful peace negotiations. Italy and several other Western European countries adopted similar language, balancing humanitarian concern with strategic caution. Yet the hesitation among these nations is often framed as a matter of international law. According to the Montevideo Convention of 1933, a state must have 4 key elements: a permanent population, a defined territory, a functioning government, and the ability to conduct relations with other states. Critics claim that Palestine, divided between the West Bank and Gaza with rival administrations, Fatah and Hamas, does not yet meet all of these criteria. Academic debates and journals like the European Journal of International Law argue that recognizing a state before it fully meets these standards risks legitimizing political fragmentation rather than sovereignty. Yet beyond legality lies geopolitics. Recognition is rarely a question of principle alone. It is a question of alliances, trade, and influence. Research published in Politics and Religion and International Affairs Review shows that states with strong military or economic ties to the United States or Israel are significantly less likely to recognize Palestine. Many rely on defense cooperation, intelligence sharing, or economic agreements that would be jeopardized by taking an opposing stance. These relationships are not easily abandoned, even under global pressure. Domestic politics also plays a role. In many Western countries, the issue of Palestine divides parliaments and voters. governments fear that official recognition could spark protests or create friction within ruling coalitions. In the United Kingdom, years before its 2025 recognition, similar debates had stalled policy change due to internal divisions. In the United States, even symbolic gestures of recognition could ignite a fierce backlash in Congress, where pro-Israel lobbying remains among the most influential in the world. Religion and culture, too, weave into the diplomatic tapestry. Islamic nations and countries with large Muslim populations generally align in support of Palestinian independence, often citing shared spiritual ties to Jerusalem. By contrast, secular Western democracies tend to frame their hesitation in pragmatic or procedural terms, seeking balance between moral stance and political cost. Yet, as several scholars note, neutrality in such a conflict is itself a political choice, one that preserves the existing power dynamic rather than challenging it. Finally, some governments insist their caution is a strategic pause. They argue that premature recognition could derail future negotiations, hardening both sides' positions and making peace less attainable. To them, recognizing Palestine without a negotiated settlement risks rewarding one side without ensuring mutual stability. Yet others argue that the opposite is true, that withholding recognition perpetuates a diplomatic stalemate, where peace remains an endless promise. For now, the divide remains clear. On one side stands a majority of nations that see recognition as an act of justice and moral consistency. On the other, a minority that defends caution in the name of process and order. Between them lies a fragile question of legitimacy, one that continues to shape the fate of an entire people and the credibility of international diplomacy itself. The years 2024 and 2025 marked a turning point in the global recognition of Palestine. After decades of cautious silence, a wave of nations across Europe, Asia, and the Pacific began shifting their stance. The humanitarian crisis in Gaza, mounting international pressure, and growing frustration with stalled peace talks reshaped how governments viewed the issue. Recognition was no longer seen as a symbolic gesture, but as a diplomatic necessity, a moral statement in a world where neutrality had become complicity. In May 2024, a powerful signal came from Europe. Ireland, Norway, and Spain made a coordinated announcement. They officially recognized the State of Palestine. The joint declaration, delivered from 3 different capitals within hours of each other, sent shockwaves through diplomatic circles. The message was clear: Europe's patience had run out. Ireland's Prime Minister stated that his nation could no longer wait for an agreement that never arrives, while Spain's Foreign Minister called recognition an act of justice, not of politics. Norway's decision, deeply symbolic as the host of the original Oslo Accords, was viewed as a quiet admission that decades of peace processes had failed to deliver tangible results. The ripple effect was immediate. Slovenia, Armenia, and later Iceland joined the list, but the real earthquake came a year later. In September 2025, during the United Nations General Assembly in New York, a new coalition of Western nations stepped forward. The United Kingdom, France, Belgium, Luxembourg, Malta, and Andorra formally declared their recognition of Palestine as an independent state. Cameras captured the applause that erupted in the assembly hall. For many observers, it marked the most significant diplomatic shift in decades, the breaking of a long-standing Western consensus that had favored caution over clarity. The decision by the United Kingdom was particularly striking. For more than 70 years, British policy had avoided official recognition, haunted by the legacy of the 1917 Balfour Declaration and its historical role in the partition of the region. Yet in 2025, London reversed its course. The British Foreign Secretary described the move as a necessary step toward a genuine two-state solution. Analysts noted that public opinion had shifted dramatically in recent years, driven by images of civilian suffering in Gaza and widespread calls for accountability in Parliament. What once seemed politically risky had become a moral imperative. France's recognition carried a different weight. Long considered one of Europe's most influential diplomatic voices, France had often walked a careful line between Israel and the Arab world. But as the humanitarian crisis deepened, Paris concluded that recognition was not a barrier to peace, but a prerequisite for it. During his speech at the UN, the French president declared that peace requires equality, and equality begins with recognition. The statement drew standing applause from several Middle Eastern delegations and cautious silence from others. For many smaller European countries, Malta, Luxembourg, and Andorra, the decision was both moral and symbolic. These nations, though lacking global power, wanted to align themselves with what they called the right side of history. Diplomats described it as a collective awakening, a realization that silence had become a form of complicity. Across Europe, newspapers described the moment as a diplomatic turning tide. But beyond Europe, the momentum was spreading elsewhere. In Asia, Indonesia and Malaysia reaffirmed their long-standing recognition, calling on neighboring countries to follow suit. Even in regions once neutral, such as the Pacific, nations like Fiji and Papua New Guinea began reconsidering their official stance. Across Africa, where support for Palestine has historically been strong, leaders welcomed the new recognitions as overdue justice. South Africa's president declared, "We see in Palestine the same shadow of oppression we once faced." The recognition wave, however, did not come without consequences. Israel reacted sharply, recalling ambassadors from several European capitals and accusing them of rewarding terrorism. The United States expressed deep disappointment, warning that these decisions could complicate peace efforts. Yet within global civil society, the opposite narrative emerged. That recognition was the first step to accountability and a path toward balancing power in negotiations. International organizations, legal scholars, and humanitarian groups welcomed the shift, describing it as the dawn of a new diplomatic reality. For Palestine, the growing recognition brought both hope and heavy responsibility. Diplomats in Ramallah called the wave of recognitions a second declaration of independence. It meant new opportunities for trade, international aid, and representation in global institutions. Yet challenges remained enormous. The division between Gaza and the West Bank, economic hardship, and limited territorial control continued to test the state's viability. Still, for millions of Palestinians watching from refugee camps, the sound of applause at the United Nations symbolized something rare, a glimpse of global validation. The momentum of 2025 proved one thing: recognition is not static. It evolves with time, with conscience, and with the shifting moral compass of nations. The map of Palestine's recognition, once full of empty spaces, now glows brighter with each new declaration. And though the struggle for sovereignty remains far from over, the world's perception of Palestine is changing, not as a question of politics alone, but as a test of global justice and the values nations claim to uphold. In the ever-shifting landscape of global diplomacy, recognition is more than a political act. It is a reflection of conscience. The story of Palestine's statehood continues to evolve, written not only by governments, but by the voices of people who demand justice and peace. As nations reconsider their positions, the map of recognition tells a deeper truth: that legitimacy, once denied, can never be silenced forever. That concludes the series of facts we uncovered today. Don't forget to subscribe to the Bring the Fact channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any other important revelations.